A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, performed by Callum Hale with music by Dylan Alcock. Stave 1. Marley's Ghost. Marley was dead, to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole friend, and sole mourner. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood years afterwards above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, "My dear Scrooge, how are you?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting-house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The door of Scrooge's counting-house was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, Bob Cratchit, who in a dismal little cell beyond was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal, wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of a strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" "Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do. Merry Christmas? What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come then, what right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." "Bah! Humbug!" "Don't be cross, Uncle. What else can I be when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas? Out upon Merry Christmas! What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money, a time for finding yourself a year older but not an hour richer? If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should." "Uncle!" "Nephew! Keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it? But you don't keep it." "Let me leave it alone, then. Much good may it do you. Much good it has ever done you." "There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say, Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time, when it has come round, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem, by one consent, to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow-passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say, God bless it." The clerk involuntarily applauded. Becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety, he poked the fire, and extinguished the last frail spark forever. "Let me hear another sound from you, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation." "Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow." Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed he did. He went the whole length of the expression, and said that he would see him in that extremity first. "But why?" "Why did you get married?" "Oh, because I fell in love." "Because you fell in love?" growled Scrooge, as if that were the only one thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. "Good afternoon." "Nay, Uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now?" "Good afternoon." "I want nothing from you, I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?" "Good afternoon." I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I have been a party, but I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humour to the last. So a Merry Christmas, Uncle.
Good afternoon.
And a Happy New Year.
Good afternoon.
His nephew stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season on the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially.
"There's another fellow," muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. "My clerk, with 15 shillings a week and a wife and family, talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam."
This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe," said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. "Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?"
"Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night."
"We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner," said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. It certainly was, for they had been 2 kindred spirits. At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned and handed the credentials back. "At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir."
"Are there no prisons?"
Plenty of prisons."
"And the union workhouses, are they still in operation?"
They are. I wish I could say they were not."
"Oh, I was afraid from what you said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course."
"Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude, a few of us are endeavouring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. What shall I put you down for?"
"Nothing."
"You wish to be anonymous?"
"I wish to be left alone. Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there."
"Many can't go there, and many would rather die."
"If they would rather die, they had better do it, and decrease the surplus population. Good afternoon, gentlemen."
Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentlemen withdrew. Meanwhile the fog thickened and the cold grew, piercing, searching, biting cold. At length the hour of shutting up the counting-house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool.
"You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose?"
"If quite convenient, sir," said the clerk.
"It's not convenient, and it's not fair when I have to pay you a day's wages for no work."
The clerk observed that it was only once a year.
"A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December," said Scrooge, buttoning his greatcoat to the chin. "But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning."
The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no greatcoat, went down a slide on Cornhill at the end of a lane of boys 20 times in honour of its being Christmas Eve, and then ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt to play at blindman's buff. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. There were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of building up a yard. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on Scrooge's door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Also that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London. Then let anyone explain to me, if they can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not in impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by breath or hot air, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That, and its livid colour, made it horrible. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled would be untrue, but he put his hand upon the key, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his single candle. He closed his door and locked himself in, double-locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing-gown and slippers, and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell. It was with great astonishment, and with a strange, inexplicable dread, that as he looked he saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This was succeeded by a clanking noise, deep down below, the sound of chains being dragged over floorboards. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise coming up the stairs, and then coming straight towards his door.
It's humbug. I won't believe it.
His colour changed, though, when without a pause it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. The same face, the very same, Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights, and boots. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made of cash-boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel.
"How now?" said Scrooge, Corsican cold as ever. "What do you want with me?"
Much.
Marley's voice, no doubt about it.
"Who are you?"
Ask me who I was.
"Who were you, then?"
In life I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
Scrooge looked doubtfully at him.
You don't believe in me.
"I don't."
Why do you doubt your senses?
"Because a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you. Whatever you are, humbug, I tell you, humbug."
At this the spirit raised a frightful cry, and shook its chain with such a dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. "Mercy! Dreadful apparition! Why do you trouble me?"
Man of the worldly mind, do you believe in me or not?
"I do. I must. But why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?"
It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men, and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turned to happiness.
Again the spectre raised a cry and shook its chain and wrung its shadowy hands.
"You are fettered. Tell me why."
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. Is its pattern strange to you? Or would you know the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full, as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have laboured on it since. It is a ponderous chain.
Scrooge glanced about him on the floor in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing.
"Jacob, old Jacob Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob."
I have none to give. It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. Oh, captive, bound, and double-ironed, not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one life's opportunity misused.
It held up its chain at arm's length, as if that were the cause of all its unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again.
Hear me! My time is nearly gone. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer.
You are always a good friend to me, thank ye.
You will be haunted by 3 spirits.
Scrooge's countenance fell. Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob?
It is.
I think I'd rather not.
Without their visit you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1.
Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over, Jacob?
Expect the second on the next night at the same hour, the third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us.
The apparition walked backward from him. The window raised itself so that when the spectre reached it, it was wide open. The spectre floated out upon the bleak, dark night. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste, and moaning as they went. The misery with them all was clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters, and had lost the power forever. Scrooge closed the window. He tried to say humbug, but stopped at the first syllable, and whether from the emotion he had undergone, or the lateness of the hour, feeling much in need of repose, he went straight to bed without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant.